Dearest Konami, I like Cyber and Dragon, so you would think I would like Cyber and Dragon. And I would, except you made it bad on purpose. I hate you so much. To begin fixing this, give Cyber and Dragon 65,000 attack and pay me this much in US dollars as a consulting fee. Maybe now they'll know the real you, Cyber and Dragon. Malefic Rata here! Your whole house is my Malefic house now! It's curtains for you, you little freak! Can you hear me? Do you have earbuds in? How many R's are there in Konami? Maybe you'll change your tune when I show you! Dessert! Now you understand! You're gonna write a new letter to Konami and demand that every field spell be turned into a Malefic! Shay, you're alive? Fuck!
Oh, sorry, I was aiming for you. Get back to reviewing, little man.
But my letter! The consultation fee! Chronarmy!
Look, I don't have time to untangle every problem in your life. I have problems to cause in other people's lives.
At least I'll always have you, Cyber. If you can believe it, there was once a time when the term special summoning used to mean something. For a good few years, putting a monster on the field in a way besides a normal or the decrepit flip summon was a rare privilege that would usually end up as a defining play of a duel. And then one day, Cyber Dragon came out. This would result in a domino effect that would rush Yu-Gi-Oh into an industrial revolution, sorry I meant cybernetic revolution, with the end result being the ability to lose by deck out when using Max C. However, another less egregious mark they left on the game was their reputation as a fun and versatile deck used by a popular anime character, receiving various forms of support over the years. Is it OTK? Is it Control? There's simply no way to find out, but let's give it a shot anyway. So first, a small preface is in order. Cyber is a massive group of cards, even when excluding obvious things like Cyber Angels, the Cybers type, or Cyberdarks, which I already covered a few times, along with adjacent stuff like Cyber Eternal. This video will focus primarily on machine-type Cyber monsters that are at least close to the Cyber Dragon design and art style, as well as their support cards. So if you feel disappointed by not seeing Cyber Raider or Cyber Blader represented, feel free to call up the Raiders and Bladers complaints department. We'll be doing this mostly in release order with some fitting leeways, so naturally we start off with the original Cyber Dragon. A level 5 light machine with 2100 attack and 1600 defense, and a simple effect saying if only your opponent controls a monster, you can special summon this card from your hand. This made many people very angry and has widely been regarded as a bad move. Way before the days of Fenrir, Pancratops, or BES Blaster Cannon Core, Cyber Dragon was the definitive monster to slap on an empty field on turn 2 and give the opponent something to be afraid of. In the early days, its utility as both a decent beater and free tribute material, and soon after Synchro Enabler, was enough to single-handedly pull the game out of GOAT format and gradually move it into the special summon arms race we know and love. We know and have opinions on today. And that's kind of funny because the consequences of Cyber Dragon's release aren't really all that reflective of the deck's playstyle. The card still has the same function it always did, but it's mostly in service of setting up their interactions rather than leading into excessive field spam. Dropping a Cyber Dragon on the field can still be as scary as it was almost 20 years ago, just for different reasons we'll get into throughout the video. Most people will tell you to run 3, cause the bigger point of contention is whether you use the original artwork or you use the alt art if you need to reflect the darkness of your soul, but consider Cyberdarks a little too edgy. Proto Cyber Dragon is a level 3 with 1100 attack and 600 defense, and is just treated as Cyber Dragon while on the field. This is great if you want more Cyber Dragons on the field, but are too much of a coward to just run 6 of them. Actually, this card is obsolete garbo, but it does hint towards a common theme of future support, which is that they're constantly fighting over who the real Cyber Dragon is. Well, I can tell you for a fact it's not this one, and I'm glad because oh my god, why does it have lips? One thing you might have considered using Proto Cyber Dragon for on a playground back in 2005 is Attack Reflector unit. A normal trap with the effect to tribute one Cyber Dragon and special summon one Cyber Barrier Dragon from your hand or deck. Please do not surround your Cyber Dragon with multiple giant mirrors, it hates the sight of its own stupid face and will react in distress. Cyber Barrier Dragon is a level 6 with 800 attack and 2800 defense, cannot be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned with Attack Reflector unit, and once per turn, while this card is in attack position, your opponent's next attack is negated. No, that's not a typo. This bastard with 2800 defense needs to be in attack position for a mandatory negate of the first attack each turn while being wimpy enough to get ran over by Boneheimer.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
This condition has astounded me since middle school, and try as I might, I still can't wrap my head around it to this day. The idea was clearly to choose between a once per turn attack negate or a 2800 wall, as if these things had to be mutually exclusive for balancing? Nobody gives a shit. Even if it wasn't mandatory, there would barely be any utility to this effect because it's so easy to bait out. It's a complete waste. The only good thing to do with this card is Barrier. Similarly, there's Photon Generator Unit. It's a quick play spell that lets you attribute 2 Cyber Dragons to special summon 1 Cyber Laser Dragon from your hand, deck, or graveyard. The Cyber Laser Dragon in question is a level 7 with 2400 attack and 1800 defense, cannot be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned with Photon Generator Unit. Once per turn, you can target 1 monster whose attack or defense is equal to or higher than this card's attack and destroy it. 2 tributes of the same monster from a specific spell card is a pretty big investment for some limited spot removal. The effect itself was alright for the time, in the unlikely case you somehow had trouble beating over something with Cyber Dragons, but oh no, the stat limit! What's that, a marshmallow? Ah, shit out of luck, buddy. No, you see, a much better use for 2 of your Cyber Dragons is their first fusion, Cyber Twin Dragon. It's a level 8 with 2800 attack and 2100 defense, and its fusion summon can only be done with 2 Cyber Dragons as materials. This card can make a second attack during each battle phase. It's an ostensibly simple effect, but a double attack with 0 conditions on a 2800 beater was pretty insane to drop when the standard for that kind of ability was Mataza the Zapper. Did you know there's an intentional misprint of this card where the attribute is written in Zaf Dingbats? Meh, big whoop. Call me when they print Shifter in Impact font. Cyber Twin Dragon is still a staple in any Sidra deck focusing on fusion, solely due to the easy summoning condition and fat damage output. It's important to mention though that the latter is helped out significantly by Power Bond, a card that lets you fusion summon only machines while doubling their attack points, at the cost of you taking damage equal to the amount of attack gained at the end of the turn. Much like most life point costs, the downside is completely negligible compared to the amount of damage you're putting on board, as Cyber Twin Dragon with a clear shot goes over 10,000 in a single battle phase. And even more if the opponent activated an unfortunate report last turn.
They hit the Pentagon!
Naturally, there's also stuff like limiter removal, but Power Bond is so iconic to the Cyber Dragon strategy that the archetype has several ways of searching it just for itself despite being generic. These are both great cards you should run, basically giving the deck an easily accessible finisher at the cost of 2 monsters. Or you could use one more and instead get Cyber End Dragon. It's a level 10 with 4000 attack and 2800 defense, same summoning condition as Cyber Twin Dragon except it requires 3 Cyber Dragons, and of course, it can attack 3 times during the same battle phase. You fucking wish. It actually just inflicts piercing. This effect was fine in 2005, when people were still actually putting things in defense position, especially with Cyberstein out in full force, but regardless, I was always a bit miffed about this one. It's the face of the archetype in the anime and essentially a successor to Blue Eye's Ultimate Dragon, but its only advantage over the previous fusion is higher base attack, as the effect has only become less impressive over time. Best case scenario, it's under Power Bond and can run over the rare 5k plus beater, and it's an OTK when attacking a face down worm, but that's about where its function begins and ends. It's pretty ironic that Cyber Twin Dragon is better at ending a duel than Cyber End Dragon. Isn't it cute how a 3-headed dragon boss monster used to be such a quaint thing? Used to be. Running it is up to you, it tends to be a nostalgia pick for some people, but it's mostly food for Cyberdarks nowadays. If they make a Cyber Darkness figure I can attach atop of this thing like a tumor, maybe I'll forgive this whole mess. Moving away from the dragons for a bit, we have Cyber Kirin, a level 3 with 300 attack and 800 defense, which you contribute to make any effect damage you take this turn 0. In the off chance that you're really scared of getting hit by the Power Bond blowback and a magic cylinder on the same turn, go ahead. Otherwise, don't bother. Cyber Phoenix is a level 4 fire machine with 1200 attack and 1600 defense, and while this card is in attack position, negate any spell or trap effects that target one machine monster you control and no other cards. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can draw 1 card. This was actually pretty alright. The protection effect is more than decent for the time, and the card even comes with some solid floating, both of which made it a competitive choice for a couple of formats. Doesn't mean you should run it now, but it is a pleasant surprise that an off-archetype card this old actually had meta relevancy. That is, unlike the archetype's other fire monster, Cyber Esper. It has 1200 attack and 1800 defense, and while this card is in face-up attack position, you can look at every card your opponent draws. Alright, don't know what this is for, but let me see. Look at its fucking face!
I'm the baby, gotta love me.
This one's kinda stretching it as far as archetype inclusion goes, but it is a light machine, so... Cyber Dinosaur is a level 8 with 2500 attack and 1900 defense, and when your opponent special summons a monster from their hand except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand. I guess it would be a funny prank on your opponent who just dropped a Cyber Dragon to hit them with a counterattack from the previous stage of evolution, but it's not like this is some kind of Pancratops that time forgot or anything. It's a way more specific Cyber Dragon, and the extra attack points are not worth it. Now that all that garbage is out of the way, we can smell melted together to make something that actually works. Chimera Tech Overdragon is a level 9 fusion with the always exciting question mark attack and defense. Ooh. It requires one Cyber Dragon and one or more machine monsters, and it must be fusion summoned. If this card is fusion summoned, send all other cards you control to the graveyard. The original attack and defense of this card each become equal to the number of fusion materials used for its fusion summon times 800. Each turn, this card can attack your opponent's monsters a number of times equal to the number of fusion materials used for its fusion summon. As far as I'm concerned, this is a much more fitting face for the archetype. All 6 of them. Overdragon is summoned with so much force that the rest of your field just crumbles under it, with the damage on board increasing exponentially with the amount of materials used. A 4800 monstrosity that can attack 6 times if things line up just right is still pretty formidable to this day, and is even the main offensive feature of some modern boss monsters. That is, of course, if you're able to make it with that many mats, which as you'd expect, is a bit of an undertaking. Investing that many monsters into a beater that wipes your own field on summon is something that requires a lot of commitment, which is at least alleviated by Overload Fusion. This spell is essentially Miracle Fusion for Dark Machines, meaning you can banish materials from the field or graveyard for the fusion summon. It's a much simpler way to put this guy on the field, but also requires a lot of setup, meaning there's probably stuff in your field you would prefer to stay there. If you're not using this thing as a dual ender, you're doing it wrong, so on one hand, it's a lot of work to put out a monster that you don't even necessarily need to run, but on the other, it's got such a big number. Next up we have Cyber Ogre. A level 5 with 1900 attack and 1200 defense, and by discarding this card from your hand to the graveyard, negate one battle involving a Cyber Ogre on your side of the field, and it gains 2000 attack until the end of its next battle. This effect can be activated during either player's turn. Yo, it's a hand trap! That's a staple! I love how it doesn't even have its own summon condition, and the only thing it supports is another one of itself, if you even manage to put it on the field, all for the dreams of 3900 attack. What are you trying to beat over, Dark Guardian? Well, you can't. I don't understand why they couldn't keep the anime effect where it gains the stats of the monster whose attack you negated. In fact, they went out of their way to make it reach just under 4k attack, like they didn't want it stealing Cyberend's Thunder or something. There wasn't much to steal! Well, at least they addressed the lack of summon condition with a trap card. Byroad Sacrifice lets you special summon a Cyber Ogre from your hand if a monster you control is destroyed by battle. Picture unrelated? It's actually similar to stuff like Fake Explosion, in that it's a card which was generic in the anime but was made to only work with a specific monster in the game, leaving the artwork to be completely incongruous with the effect. Personally, I think they should start doing this more often. Anyway, it's stupid pack filler just like Cyber Ogre. If the monster was actually good, they would make a Cyber Ogre 2. Cyber Ogre 2 is a level 7 fusion monster with 2600 attack and 1900 defense, requires 2 Cyber Ogres as materials, la di fucking da, and much like the dragons, a fusion summon of this monster can only be conducted with the above monsters. When this card attacks, it gains attack equal to half the attack of the attack target during damage calculation only. This is fine, in a similar way that Gaia Plate was fine, as it easily beats over anything with less than 5200 attack. Truly, Cyber Ogre 2 walked so that Boral Sword can fly. Sadly, the prerequisite of requiring 2 Cyber Ogres will always be too much to ask for. Even with some archetypal ways to cheat this thing out, there are better targets for doing so, which makes me a bit sad as my monkey brain does think it's a cool card. But if they eventually make more Cyber Ogres, you're not allowed to blame me. Armored Cybern is a level 4 Wind Machine Union monster with 0 attack and 2000 defense, and once per turn you can either target one Cyber Dragon you control, or one fusion monster you control that lists Cyber Dragon as material, equip this card to that target, or unequip this card and special summon it. Once per turn, while equipped to a monster by this effect, you can target one face-up monster on the field. The equipped monster loses exactly 1000 attack, even if this card leaves the field, and if it does, destroy that target. If the equipped monster would be destroyed by battle or card effect, destroy this card instead. As a big sucker for equip gimmicks and combining machines, it always pained me to see old Union monsters being worthless. Very few disappointments I've ever had with this game come even close to seeing Koitsu's level 10 ass on full display with 200 attack, thinking, ooh, what's going on here? And then reading the effect.
We've got piercing!
Armored Cybern offers a bit of removal at the standard Union cost of needing to hit the field to equip itself, along with a permanent 1000 attack decrease in an archetype that much prefers to keep its attack points. It's a neat thing aesthetically, but it kinda got outclassed within the year by Evolution Burst. It's a spell that simply lets you target and destroy one card your opponent controls if you control Cyber Dragon, but it cannot attack that turn. Functionally more versatile and easier to pull off, and yet still not worth running. Therefore, Cybern isn't either, despite Konami desperately trying to get you to unionize your monsters. Next up we have Cyber Valley. Okay, so it's a level 1 with 0 attack and defense, and you can use one of these effects. When this card is targeted for an attack by an opponent's monster, you can banish this card, draw one card, then end the battle phase. You can target one face-up monster you control and discard, banish both that target and discard, then draw 2 cards. Or you can target one card in your graveyard, banish both discard and one card from your hand, then place that target on top of the deck. Pretty much every aspect of this card has something worth talking about, so let's take it from the top. Cyber Valley? It's not a field spell, it's a monster whose effects are varied. Come on, Kevin, at least we agree on something for once. How'd you let this happen? What did I know? Opus Ghostisk Fortunes Consortium? Cyberdrachenspielen? Yippee! I always thought this artwork was pretty creepy. It's like an undead version of a cyber dragon, which is interesting since they usually don't show any organic features. It even shares some similarities with other zombified dragons of the time, so it makes me wonder if that was the original plan for the card. Finally, the effect. You'd be correct to notice this has fuck all to do with the cyber dragon playstyle, but much like Phoenix from earlier, it actually gave the card a few decent years of meta relevancy outside of the archetype. The banish cost for such a versatile effect lineup, along with draw power, gave a lot more mileage to popular banish recovery cards like Return or Fusion. Even after their ban, it was a popular stall card in slower formats for quite a while, especially with machine duplication. Its second and third effects had some niche usage, but the card's overall utility was mostly limited to the first one. I used to play this in Spirits. Yes, I played Spirits. Don't play Spirits. Cyber Valerie is a card you didn't commonly find inside the archetype back then, let alone today, but it left its mark on the game well enough. Don't run it, but definitely appreciate it from afar. Cyber Ouroboros is a level 2 with 100 attack and 600 defense, and when this card is banished, you can send one card from your hand to the graveyard to draw one card. Oh cool, can't wait to use this with Cyber Valley for some deck taining, or maybe as material for Overload Fusion. Yeah, let me also overlay some tokens while I'm at it, or maybe negate this counter trap with my MST. You know what? I tribute 2 monsters to give my obelisk infinite attack. I win! So yeah, you can't actually do these things, because when would you even do it? Stupid ass game. Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon is the last Cyber Dragon fusion we got out of the anime, and it's a level 8 with 0 attack and defense, requires 1 Cyber Dragon and 1 or more machine monsters, and it cannot be used as fusion material. Must first be special summoned from your extra deck by sending the above cards from either field to the graveyard. You do not use polymerization. The original attack of this card becomes 1000 times the number of fusion materials used for its special summon. Plain and simple, this is not a beat stick. It can be, but its thinly veiled primary function is to be one of the dirtiest removal cards ever printed. If your opponent happens to be controlling exclusively machines, plopping down a single Cyber Dragon on the field essentially sucks up their entire monster lineup into this thing, leaving them open for several thousands worth of damage before any effects even activated. Ever since release, Fortress Dragon would creep up into any machine-dominated format as an easy field wipe, all at the cost of teching in a single Cyber Dragon into your deck. But say, what if the opponent isn't playing machines? Well, in 2022, Konami was kind enough to supply us with Clockwork Knight, a continuous spell that turns all monsters on the field into machines. It does put a single effect activation in the way, but if you manage to get it out, the card turns Cyber Dragon into Super Ultra Giga Cyber Polymerization.
Oh, my masters!
In addition to that, it also increases all your machine's attack and decreases the opponent's by 500, and lets you search Therion Regulus on floating. How did this card come from the Virtual World arc? That's like exploring old Babylonian ruins and finding a frag grenade. It's never been less debatable whether to play Fortress or not. Free removal, free damage, free willy. Wrapping up the anime stuff, we have a few pieces of back row left. Future Fusion is easily the most notable one, despite not being a Cyber Dragon card. It's a continuous spell that, before the errata, would let you dump fusion materials straight from the deck to summon the fusion monster 2 turns later. As a kid, this was one of the coolest cards I could imagine, much like anything else that lets you cheese out fusion monsters with no effort. In the anime, it was primarily used within the archetype, but was eventually banned due to its single other usage in the show becoming how it would mostly get used by players from then on out, which is by dumping a whole bunch of dragons with graveyard effects for good old 5-headed. The card's eventual errata made it slower than molasses, but it did get an archetype themed version last year, that being Overload Future Fusion. Once per turn, it lets you either dump a material listed on a fusion monster from the deck to the graveyard, but you can't activate the effects of monsters with that name or special summon them for the rest of this turn, or fusion summon a Dark Machine monster by banishing materials from the graveyard. I'm sorry, who is this for? In case you wanted a worse Foolish Burial and Overload Fusion in one, there you go! God, it even disables all the monsters sharing Cyber Dragon's name from functioning properly. Why did they make this? It's barely even worth running in a Cyberdark mashup, let alone pure Cyber Dragons. That iconic imagery of Future Fusion that would lead into massive graveyard setup and potentially a huge beater on the field was already soiled by the errata, you don't have to rub it in with this pointless retrain. I'm actually kinda offended, let's just leave this one in the past instead. Cybernetic Zone is a quick play that lets you banish a machine fusion monster you control until the end phase, double its attack when it returns, but destroy it during your next standby phase. I think it's really funny funny that you can't even make use of the attack boost on your own turn, because the monster only comes back in the end phase, but blows up during your own standby phase. Its literal only use is to scare the opponent off with high stats after your turn is done, at the cost of losing the fucking monster afterwards. Why am I even talking about this? This is Roboyaro support. Cybernetic Hidden Technology is a continuous trap that says, when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can send to the graveyard one Cyber Dragon you control, or one fusion monster you control that lists Cyber Dragon as material, then target the attacking monster, destroy that target. I understand it can be really upsetting when someone's actually able to beat over your Cyber Dragons, prompting you to take petty revenge against that pesky Tyranno Infinity, but there are better ways to go about it. Some might even satiate your gambling addiction.
Congratulations, you won. Congratulations.
In that awkward period between the end of GX and the release of the structure deck, we got 3 monsters, 2 from the manga and 1 original. I don't count Malefic Cyber End Dragon because I already counted it 6 years ago. Oh god, that was 6 years ago. Cyber Larva is a level 1 with 400 attack and 600 defense, and if this card is targeted for an attack, you take no battle damage for the rest of this turn. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can special summon 1 Cyber Larva from your deck. I despise any monster that wastes my time by floating into more of itself after battle, so you're lucky you're cute. As a stall card though, there has never been any reason to run this over Valley. And, well, if Cyber Ogre was so good that it got Cyber Ogre 2, when Cyberdrache so gut ist, warum gibt es dann keinen Cyberdrache 2? Oh mein Gott! Cyber Dragon 2 is a level 4 with 1500 attack and 1000 defense, and this card's name becomes Cyber Dragon while in the graveyard. Once per turn, you can reveal 1 spell in your hand. This card's name becomes Cyber Dragon until the end phase. If this card attacks an opponent's monster, it gains 300 attack during the damage step only. This doesn't really do anything, like, at all, but it is the first monster since Proto to carry over the name sharing effect. Cyber Dragon monsters explicitly being named Cyber Dragon while on the field or in the graveyard is pretty important, for reasons that should be clear by now and will only become more obvious as we go on. The manga gave us an interesting boss monster in the form of Cyber Eltanin, a level 10 with question mark attack and defense, which cannot be normal summoned or set. Must be special summoned from your hand by banishing all light machine monsters from your field and graveyard. This card's attack and defense become the number of monsters banished for a special summon times 500. If this card is special summoned, send all other face-up monsters on the field to the graveyard. This is basically a main deck version of Chimera Tech Overdragon. Pump a bunch of monsters into your last resort, cross fingers and hope for the best. It's not bad. The non-destruction nuke is pretty crazy, and depending on your resources, this can get big enough to swing for game. It's a pretty risky card that can pay off in the right situation, so it's up to you if you decide to run it. It doesn't always work out, but it's fun to roll up to an unsuspecting opponent with fucking Sinistar.
Beware, I live.
A few years later, the archetype would be put back into spotlight with the structure deck Cyber Dragon Revolution. The first card of the new bunch is Cyber Dragon Core, a level 2 with 400 attack and 1500 defense, and this card's name becomes Cyber Dragon while on the field or in the graveyard. If this card is normal summoned, add 1 Cyber spell or trap from your deck to your hand. If only your opponent controls a monster, you can banish this card from your graveyard, special summon 1 Cyber Dragon monster from your deck. You can only use 1 Cyber Dragon Core effect per turn and only once that turn. The name is not a coincidence. To your Cyber Dragon deck, this card is the Cyber Dragon. Fixing what was broke with Proto Sidra, Core takes the useful idea of copying its name and puts it on a monster eligible for machine dupe. This means that hitting Core with it nets you 2 Cyber Dragons straight from the deck, which alone would have been enough to make the card worth running, but it also comes with 2 other effects. Mainly, the first one lets you search all of your back row, as well as some of Jinzo's and Harpies. This is like the card game version of a laundromat mix-up. The second effect is also pretty good, giving the archetype some teamed recovery that can go into any Cyber Dragon from the deck, which can be pretty useful in case the OTK doesn't immediately pan out. It also helps that the deck can make plays outside of this single normal summon, so it's not too big of a deal if it gets negated. It is still kind of a big deal though, so watch when you're summoning. Regardless, this has always been and still is a 3-off. Cyber Dragon Dry is a level 4 with 1800 attack and 800 defense. This card's name becomes Cyber Dragon while on the field or in the graveyard, and when this card is normal summoned, you can make all Cyber Dragons you currently control become level 5. You cannot special summon monsters that turn you activate this effect except machine monsters. If this card is banished, you can target 1 Cyber Dragon you control. It cannot be destroyed by battle or card effects this turn. Before getting into the effect itself, let us take a quick detour into Rank 10 Yu-Gi-Oh's signature. Is that what that is? From the series that brought you Relinquished has a face, that's not Buster Blader's shoe, and Alfan has no mouth, now comes, oh my god, Cyber Dragon Dry's head is there? And is not, in fact, this nebulous jet fighter shape on its tail. And you can't say it's just me, because I pointed this out to like 5 people and they all had the same reaction. I guess it's because I just never took a closer look at the monster, but the way it coils into a figure 8, combined with how much the plane sticks out, made the actual head seem more like a random detail on its back, as opposed opposed to the other way around. In retrospect, Zwei also seems to have something like this, but it's not nearly as pronounced. This thing could easily be a monster in and of itself. As for Dry's effect, the card is very much a product from the end of the Zexal era. The normal summon is a simple Xyz enabler, which you're most likely to have on the field after the OG Sidra, making for an easy rank 5. However, that was still deemed a bit too generic at the time, so your summons for the turn were limited to machines, which did contain some pretty good stuff, if you had a few $100s to expend. It's also got a weirdly specific protection effect that was put there to synergize with some of their new cards, because the deck sure as hell wasn't triggering this with Overload. Some extra survivability to the fusions would have been great. I don't know why it was limited only to the OG. Dry served its purpose back in the day, but it was never as good of a normal summon as Core, especially not right now. If you need rank 5 material, you're gonna run Galaxy Soldier. This is a level 5 light machine with a special summon condition that also sets up the graveyard and searches more of itself. It's been an honorary Cyber Dragon for about 10 years, and that's what it's gonna keep being until they figure out something better. Run this instead. The monster you'll most likely be summoning with all this stuff is the rank 5 Cyber Dragon Nova. It's an Xyz monster with 2500 attack and 1600 defense, requires 2 level 5 machines, and once per turn, you can detach 1 material from this card, then target 1 Cyber Dragon in your graveyard, special summon that target. Once per turn during either player's turn, you can banish 1 Cyber Dragon from your hand or face up from your monster zone. This card gains 2100 attack until the end of this turn. If this card in your possession is sent to your graveyard by your opponent's card effect, you can special summon 1 machine fusion monster from your extra deck. Now, I'm sure there was a sizable chunk of Cyber Dragon purists at the time who weren't too big on seeing a classic anime fusion archetype being tweaked into an Xyz playstyle as the selling point of a new structure deck. Hell, even Synchros would have been more fitting given how well Cyber Dragons played with tuners during the previous era. And I get it, but also I don't give a shit! Nova absolutely whips ass. First of all, the recovery. As soon as you summon the card, you get a free Cyber Dragon revive, and with the way this archetype works, that's most of your main deck. Not to mention, if you already have one in the graveyard, once you activate this effect, you can simply restore one of the materials after detaching it as cost. Then you have the attack boost that gets the card up to a beefy 4200, which is also a quick effect that can use a card from the hand as cost, potentially catching the opponent off guard on their turn. The cost in question is admittedly a banish, which can be a lot, but hey, that's what Drive was for. Synergy! Wrapping it up is the floating, which goes off only by effect removal, which the opponent will be incentivized to use given the high attack value. In case they do, Nova gives you access to a free machine fusion monster, and I'm not sure if you comprehend the lineup offered to you here. That's right, we're talking Metal Dragons, Steam Gyroids, and Cybersauruses!
Orifices!
I'm gonna be real, there's unfortunately not as much insane stuff to summon off of this as you would think, mostly because big scary fusion monsters usually expect you to actually fusion summon them. The point of the effect is to float into a big beater in case Nova's 4k plus attack was repelled or something and you need a backup. Either that or Mekaba, which might cause some war flashbacks as a bonus. Overall, Nova is a great card that perfectly falls in line with the rest of the archetype despite being an Xyz monster, as it uses all the benefits of the mechanic to extend the deck's plays and put a lot more damage on board. Its functions are simply infinite. The guy for Infinite Impermanence? Cyber Dragon Infinity is a rank 6 with 2100 attack and 1600 defense and requires 3 level 6 light machine monsters, which is not how you're gonna summon it unless you're into some really gonzo Xyz maneuvers. Once per turn you can also Xyz summon Cyber Dragon Infinity by using Cyber Dragon Nova you control as material. Transfer its materials to this card. Gains 200 attack for each material attached to it. Once per turn you can target one face-up attack position monster on the field, attach it to this card as material. Once per turn, during either player's turn, when a card or effect is activated, you can detach one material from this card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. Remember that time I talked about how Nova is a logical evolution of the Cyber Dragon playstyle? It feels so long ago now. Cyber Dragon Infinity is... well, obviously it's not bad, I don't need to tell you this. In fact, it's one of the best fucking cards ever made. Easy summon condition, hits the field with a bunch of materials, gains more of them by removal that doesn't enable floating, which it can then use for a generic Omni Negate and pop. And the nastiest of all, a 200 attack boost for each! The artwork is also great, retaining Nova's striking features like the black plating and red energy core extending into these glowing lines across its body, while curling its tail into an infinity symbol. It's all very cool. It would be silly to complain about the card from a general quality standpoint, because it's so good that it got a Tellarknight Xyz banned for several years for having an effect that lets it turn itself into Nova and therefore give generic rank 4 spammers easy access to infinity. It was a bigger problem that Ptolemaios can summon infinity than that it can skip the opponent's turn. Is this the forbidden cyber style technique? My problem with the card, however, is that within Cyber Dragons, it's kinda like tagging out a boxing champ for a guy with a taser. Like, sure, way more efficient, but not in the way I'm here for. And the audience is shocked as well. The monster appears deceptively locked into the archetype for like 5 seconds due to its summoning requirements, but the effect is very deliberately generic, working on any target under no condition. It's not just a little coinkydink that this was released in the same pack as Ptolemaios. Sure, Cyber Dragons could make use of it, but so could anything else that also hit a Swiss Army Exodec that actually did things other than hit people really hard. It is with a heavy heart that I'm gonna say what nobody else is saying. Cyber Dragon Infinity is a less thematic archetypal inclusion than this. At least its effect actually mentioned the goddamn archetype by name. In the end, you can't say that doing away with the archetype's identity in favor of negation and spot removal didn't make for a powerful card, whichever deck you're running it in. As far as Cyber Dragons go, it's a good control option and one of your rare first turn plays, so you should run one of these for each Nova you have. Cyber Repair Plant is a normal spell with the effect, if Cyber Dragon is in your graveyard, you can activate one of these effects. If you have 3 or more Cyber Dragons in your graveyard at this card's activation, you can activate both effects and resolve in sequence. You can only activate one Cyber Repair Plant per turn. Add one Light Machine monster from your deck to your hand, or target one Light Machine monster in your graveyard, shuffle that target into your deck. This is a pretty interesting card, as while it can naturally search a majority of the archetype, it also gives the deck a search pool of around 130 monsters. A lot of crap, of course, but some pretty good stuff too, like Jizukiru, Carnot, Galaxy Soldier, Disablaster, and of course, DD Jedi Run. Oh my god, Rata, watch out, how are you not seeing the Dark Magician Girl inflation mat? The recovery effect is also fine, especially if you can pull it off along with the searching, but it's not the primary focus here. I understand the need for the graveyard condition, even though it can sometimes make the card a pretty annoying brick, but Core can search it and easily make it live by going into Almirage, so one copy is perfectly fine. Frankly, this just reminds me of the sad reality that Gradius is a series of light machines not connected by name, so they can't receive any actual support, while BES is out there yucking it up as an archetype instead. They are more of an archetype than you will ever be! Cybernetic Fusion Support is a quick play spell that lets you pay half your life points to make it so that once, if you fusion summon a machine fusion monster this turn, you can banish monsters from your hand, field and or graveyard as materials. You can only activate one Cybernetic Fusion Support per turn. This was like a little extra spice for your power bond in case you had trouble fetching the materials, but the investment of half your life points, a fusion spell and banishing a bunch of monsters really incentivize you to finish the duel on the same turn. This made the card pretty suboptimal for, well, anything, but I'll give myself some quick leeway and skip to a more recent fusion spell that mixes things up here called Cyberload Fusion. Whoa guys, watch the tips. It's a quick play spell that says fusion summon one fusion monster from your extra deck that lists a Cyber Dragon monster's material by shuffling the fusion materials listed on it into the deck from among your cards on the field and or your face-up banished cards, but monsters you control cannot attack for the rest of this turn except that fusion summoned monster. You can only activate one Cyberload Fusion per turn. As an archetypal fusion spell, this is a bit weird. It's less of a default go-to for the deck like many of these tend to be, and more of a combo tool dependent on some other cards. Cyber Dragons can definitely focus on a more banish-centric playstyle that makes Cyberload work, but your average beatdown variant will have some trouble getting the most use out of it. That said, making Eltanin or summoning a monster with Overload and then hitting Cyberload during the battle phase after it attacks is pretty cool, and a nice way to take advantage of the card being a quick play despite coming with that attack limitation. We'll get into more cards that have interesting synergies with Cyberload as we go on, but overall this is a pretty unconventional fusion spell that goes along better with some more specific builds. So does it make Cybernetic Fusion Support worth running? I'd say only if you're really desperate. And speaking of banishing Cyber Dragons, Cyber Network is a continuous trap that says, destroy this card during your third standby phase after activation. That's the whole effect, just kidding. Once per turn, if Cyber Dragon is on the field, you can banish one light machine monster from your deck. If this card is sent from the field to the graveyard, special summon as many of your banished light machine monsters as possible, and if you do, destroy all spells and traps you control. Monsters that were special summoned by this effect cannot activate their effects. You cannot conduct your battle phase the turn you activate this effect. I think the Cyber Network needs a new provider, cause this shit is running on dial-up. It's a strange delayed swarming effect that rids you of resources to build up a play that might not even matter once it actually happens. Sure, you can trigger it yourself, and it has some faint synergy with a few cards we already went over, but that doesn't change the fact that it's comically slow, negates activated effects, and also blows up the rest of your back row for some reason. There were no Sidra spells or traps with floating at the time of this thing's release, so it just comes off as really weird overbalancing or a clumsy way to enforce the beatdown playstyle. I guess the artifact mashup would be pretty bangin'. They are level 5. Cyber Network barely even finds place in trap-centric builds, let alone the OTK ones. Only run if you're confident in some really outlandish combo that hasn't been discovered yet. Soon after the structure deck, we were swiftly brought back to the classic Cyber style with a fusion monster, Chimera Tech Rampage Dragon. Well, Infinity was in the same pack, but you don't become game-breakingly important enough to mention early by keeping it old school. Sorry, buddy. It's a dark fusion with the usual Cyber Dragon stats, requires 2 or more Cyber Dragon monsters, and the fusion summon of this card can only be done with the above fusion materials. When this card is fusion summoned, you can target spells or traps on the field up to the number of materials used for its fusion summon, destroy them. Once per turn, you can send up to 2 light machine monsters from your deck to the graveyard, and if you do, for each monster sent to the graveyard, this card gains 1 additional attack during each battle phase this turn. Just a straight up good card with no bullshit hanging off of it. Clears back row on summon, sets up the graveyard by dumping from deck, and attacks 3 times. It gets up at 8, owns a repair shop, and has a glass of water at the barcade after work. The dumping effect in particular is very strong, enabling recovery and graveyard effects, and if you're really desperate, the first effect can indeed pop Cyber Network. Awesome! No stat boosting on this one, but it offers enough in other areas for that not to be a problem, especially with Power Bond's existence. You definitely want one of these regardless of the variant you're playing. So, where were you when Master Rule 4 dropped? I was asleep, blissfully unaware that I was about to wake up in hell. As an archetype centered around the Exa deck, Cyber Dragons were naturally left waiting for a decent Link monster as a pick-me-up. What I got was... something else. Chimera Tech Mega Fleet Dragon is a level 10 with 0 attack and defense, requires 1 Cyber Dragon monster and 1 or more monsters in the extra monster zone and cannot be used as fusion material. Must first be special summoned from your Exa deck by sending the above cards from either field to the graveyard. The original attack of this card becomes 1200 times the number of materials used for its special summon. Usually when Cyber Dragons would drop a single card that's meant to be a sneaky meta usurper, they didn't make it this obvious. Mega Fleet is a little bizarre. It's the utility of Fortress Dragons streamlined into something much more specific, yet way more versatile. For one, it doesn't require the original Cyber Dragon as material, which means you could also summon it with Toon's Cyber Dragon, a card much more searchable at the time with 3 table of contents. This also packed the graveyard with spells which enabled Sky Strikers to work, and I don't fucking care about that! The summoning condition made it easy to scoop up any primary Exa deck piece put down by the opponent, whether it was you controlling the Cyber Dragon in question, or them. While certainly a linchpin in the mirror match, Mega Fleet was also a key component in breaking the boards of any deck that still found a way to put Infinity on the field along with a Link monster, such as the long decrepit Cyber Dragon Orcust variant. Fusion summoning by using the opponent's monsters as material is already a nasty form of removal, but using exclusively them without any card investment from your side is insane. What you get for all of this is usually a 2400 beater, 3600 if you got something of your own or if you let it get really bad, but stats are not really the point here. You can tell given that multiples of 1200 are not really present elsewhere in the archetype. Overall, Mega Fleet is just kind of a symptom of the era type of card. Very embarrassing era that we should strive not to repeat, but at least it follows the gimmick set by the archetype a decade earlier, so it doesn't really make me upset or anything. It's still a useful tool you should absolutely run in the deck. What follows is the last batch of the deck's modern support outside of Cyberdogs, all the way back in 2018, with only bits and pieces afterwards that I'm cramming all together. Cyber Pharaohs is a level 1 with 0 attack and 2100 defense, and you can special summon this card from your hand by tributing 1 machine monster. Once per turn during your main phase, you can fusion summon 1 machine fusion monster from your Exa deck using monsters from your hand and or field as material. When a fusion monster you control is destroyed by battle, you can banish this card from your graveyard, add 1 power bond from your deck to your hand. You can only use this effect of Cyber Pharaohs once per turn. Oh, that's cute. They put like a little courtesy effect before the power bond search. Yeah, this'll totally make people believe this has a reason to exist after fucking up the one thing it was supposed to do. This archetype relied so much on power bond to deliver its killing blows over the years that an easier way to fetch it from the deck basically felt inevitable. When Cyber Pharaohs dropped, it felt evitable. Holy shit, that's a real word? Oh. Mr. Chomsky. The summoning condition is weird and tacked on, the once per turn fusion is unnecessary, and the search effect is so uselessly specific that it comes off like a joke. Oh damn dude, you let that get destroyed by battle? That's rough. Here, try again. Any of this card's barely existent utility was entirely eclipsed by Cyberdark Chimera, so I feel confident calling this a pointless, soulless stick. Cyber Dragon Hertz is a level 1 with 100 attack and defense, and its name becomes Cyber Dragon while on the field or in the graveyard. You can only use one of the following effects of Cyber Dragon Hertz once per turn, and only once that turn. If this card is special summoned, you can make this card's level become 5 until the end of the turn. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn, except machine monsters. If this card is sent to the graveyard, you can add one other Cyber Dragon from your deck or graveyard to your hand. Pretty good stuff. The first effect is not really why you're here, but it can definitely be useful with all your swarming effects to emulate the function of Drive for Xyz plays. The second effect, however, gives you plenty of searching and recovery that plays along with any card setting up the graveyard, be it sending from deck, discarding, or using as material. Very strong when used as recovery given the archetype's graveyard name sharing, although not being able to search anything from the deck besides the original Cyber Dragon hurts. It's also one of your many machine dupe targets to bring out the OGs, so this one's definitely a 3-off. Next up is their last level 1, Cyber Dragon Naxter. Why are they all German? Is because of Kaiser! It has 200 attack and defense, and this card's name becomes Cyber Dragon while on the field or in the graveyard. You can discard one other monster, special summon this card from your hand. If this card is normal or special summoned, you can target one machine monster with 2100 attack or defense in your graveyard, special summon it. Also, you cannot special summon monsters for the rest of this turn, except machine monsters. You can only use each effect of Cyber Dragon Naxter once per turn. Another solid piece of support that offers both graveyard setup and swarming before even activating the recovery. The effect in question though is a little strange. The 2100 attack or defense designation is fitting, but also new to the archetype. It can revive a lot of important monsters, but what else could they have intended you to summon with this that happened to synergize with the archetype at the time? Ding! How is this a machine deck when it's full of fucking plants? Plants, plants, plants. Plants, plants, plants. Plants, plants, plants. There's plants in my deck. Yeah, Naxter can restore a good bit of the archetype, as well as stuff outside of it, such as Dingirsu, Mekaba, and quite a few Infinitracks. You most likely won't be using it for those at this point in time, but it's an appreciated bit of versatility. OG Sidra, Chimera, Cyber Twin, Rampage, Nova, Battle Footballer, Infinity, the ability to instantly recover these on summon is great to have either as play extension or enabling a comeback. Locking you into machines is hardly a big deal on a monster like this, so along with being yet another machine dupe target, it's a very nice card overall. Their last main deck monster is Cyber Dragon Fear. Meh, I've seen scarier. It's a level 4 with 1100 attack and 1600 defense. It becomes Cyber Dragon while on the field or in the graveyard, and if you normal or special summon Cyber Dragon except during the damage step, you can special summon this card from your hand in defense position. You can only use this effect of Cyber Dragon Fear once per turn. Each Cyber Dragon you control gains 500 attack and defense. Aside from the stat boost, which while respectable isn't a game changer, this is very much a bland remnant of generic Link-era swarm effects. In a format where archetypes that used to treat their Extra deck like a second hand suddenly had to fight tooth and nail to summon one boss monster, simple field presence of this sort was a godsend. While not necessarily bad nowadays, being ran as a one-off in some slower builds, its extension and stat boosting aren't something the archetype is in dire need of, especially as it provides quite literally nothing else. Run in the beatdown variant only if you're somehow missing those OTKs by 500 points. Their last fusion monster is the level 8 Cyber Rush Dragon. It has 2800 attack and 2100 defense, requires 2 Cyber Dragons, and once per turn if your opponent controls a monster, it lets you draw until you have 5 cards in your hand, then send 4 cards from your hand to the graveyard to special summon 1 machine monster from your hand. Holy shit! That's insane! So much draw power and graveyard setup, how is this legal? Because it's a Rush Duel card! They've got places to be over there. Their actual last fusion monster is Cyber Eternity Dragon. It's a level 10 with 2800 attack and 4000 defense, and it requires fusing 1 Cyber Dragon monster and 2 machine monsters to summon. If you have a machine fusion monster in your graveyard, your opponent cannot target this card with card effects, also it cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. If this fusion summoned card you control is sent to your graveyard by an opponent's card, you can special summon 1 Cyber Dragon from your hand, deck, or graveyard. You can banish this card from your graveyard. This turn, your opponent cannot target fusion monsters you control with card effects, also they cannot be destroyed by your opponent's card effects. Alright, I guess I'll take this as an apology for barrier.
You're up against the wall and I am the fucking wall!
Right out the gate, Eternity asks a lot out of you to be fully functional. Not only does it require 3 materials as a defensive counterpart to Cyber End, but you need to have stocked up the graveyard with a fusion to give it some actual survivability on the field. Still, I'd be down with that if it actually did anything while on there. A 4K wall with a bunch of protection can be tough to get over, I would know, but there's a shit ton of easily accessible cards that let you get rid of it if there's nothing to back it up. So that's where the floating comes in. Bringing out a Cyber Dragon and not a Cyber Dragon monster feels weird given the hefty summoning condition. It's still possible to turn that into a comeback, as pointed out earlier, but letting you restore the fusion monster you used to give Eternity the protection effect seems like something that would be logical, yet just isn't there. The graveyard bench can be useful for letting you punch through with your big fusions after it dies without having to worry about disruption too much, which is arguably better than the card's effect on the field. This is a decent lineup of abilities, but it's pretty reliant on you playing a slower variant that takes a bit of time before swinging for damage. Run by preference, but don't expect to summon it much, especially in the standard beatdown build. And their last monster overall is the link to Cyber Dragon Sieger. I used to think he was Seizure, as in he sieges things, but nein, he's just Deutsch again. It's got 2100 attack, points left and down, requires 2 machine monsters including Cyber Dragon, and of course, this card's name becomes Cyber Dragon while on the field or in the graveyard. During either player's battle phase, if this card has not declared an attack, you can target 1 machine monster you control with 2100 or more attack. For the rest of this turn, that monster gains 2100 attack and defense. Also, neither player takes any battle damage from attacks involving this monster. You can only use this effect of Cyber Dragon Sieger once per turn. First of all, I appreciate the name sharing here, as it's pretty cool to have an extra deck monster you can easily bring back. Naturally though, the second effect is the main draw, giving away Sieger's battle damage for the turn and putting it on a different monster. The utility of this is a bit specific. Due to the way it works, the amount of attack on your field remains the same, so you're either using it to beat over something big, or give a lot more damage output to one of your multi-attackers. Sieger is at its best when used as an OTK enabler in the latter scenario, which is why it helps that it's easily recoverable due to the name sharing. It's also a quick effect, which can make the opponent think twice before attacking, or not at all because they didn't read the card, which is much more likely. Sieger is a solid addition to any board that can make it, so despite needing the stars to align a bit to be as useful as it can, it's definitely capable of living up to its name. Before we move on to the last bit of back row, I feel the need to mention Eosvarog, Forger of the Dawn, a fusion monster that requires 2 light machines, retrieves a fusion card from the graveyard during the next standby phase after summon, and lets you negate an opponent's spell or trap effect by either banishing 1 light machine you control or 2 from your graveyard. This is not a particularly great monster, but there are worse things to sit down if you end up going first. It gives you back the fusion card and offers some negation at a cost you can possibly make up for. Anyway, what the hell is an Eosvarog? Oh, I get it, it's dishwasher compatible. Cyber Rev System is a normal spell that says special summon 1 Cyber Dragon from your hand or graveyard. It cannot be destroyed by card effects. You can only use this effect of Cyber Rev System once per— wait. This is not once per turn? A card from 2018? And we're all still alive? Pretty fucking simple. Swarming or recovery along with protection, all while searchable by core. You can run any number of these given how accessible they are, although in faster builds you hardly need more than 1. That is, unless you're just jonesing to make use of that lack of once per turn limitation. Their next normal spell is Cyber Emergency, which says, add 1 light machine monster that cannot be normal summoned or set, or 1 Cyber Dragon monster from your deck to your hand. If the activation of this card in its owner's possession was negated by your opponent's card effect and sent to your graveyard, you can discard 1 card, add this card to your hand. You can only activate 1 Cyber Emergency per turn. My beloved searchable searchers. Why even have cards in your deck at this point? Just hold 40. This is a fantastic card because it searches not only your whole archetype, but some of the random shit you could fetch with Repair Plant as well. It's functionally 3 more copies of that card except with no condition, and as a cool manga reference, a handy anti-negate clause. That is, anti-activation negate and not anti-effect negate, so Ash Blossom unfortunately still goes through. Regardless, it's appreciated to have on a support card for a going second deck, as you're likely to be up against a lot of negates and it can even help you set up the graveyard. Run 3 of these at all times, no question about it. Super Strident Blaze is an equip spell that you can only equip to a machine fusion monster. Your opponent cannot activate cards or effects during your battle phase. At the end of the damage step, if the equipped monster attacked an opponent's monster, you can banish 1 Cyber Dragon monster from your graveyard. The equipped monster can attack an opponent's monster again in a row. Your other monsters cannot attack the turn you activate this effect. If we as a society didn't spend this much time making up for Cyber End's problems, maybe we could have constructed a real actual Cyber Dragon. Dragon. Like a lot of signature attack spells, this is very much a win more card. It works on any machine fusion, but requires banishing Cyber Dragons for the multi-attack, and as most of your good fusions already do that by themselves, this is pretty much limited to Cyber End Dragon to work effectively. The battle phase stun is pretty nice, and the card can definitely enable an OTK, but relying on an equip spell unsearchable within the archetype to do so is way too unreliable. It really speaks to Overdragon's quality that cards are being made just to turn other monsters into it. And speaking of doing that, here's Evolution and Burst, another signature attack card and the final spell in the archetype which says, add one Overload fusion from your deck to your hand. If you fusion summon a monster this turn with Overload fusion, using 6 or more monsters as material, that monster can attack a number of times each battle phase this turn, up to the number of monsters used as materials. For the rest of this turn after this card resolves, you cannot special summon monsters except with spell effects. You can only activate one Evolution and Burst per turn. A solid 90% of this card's purpose is to let you attack the opponent directly multiple times with Overdragon instead of just monsters. This came out around the time Rata Anaconda got banned, so giving you something else to fetch Overload with is cool I guess, but Endburst itself is not searchable, and it's hardly worth running such a card just to ensure directly attacking 6 times over doing it to monsters as some kind of definitive clutch play. I'm mostly just comparing the utility of using this over summoning Chimeritic Overdragon the usual way, but it's not like making something else with Overload would suddenly make it good. It doesn't help that the summon only by spells limitation is there, imploring you to focus exclusively on Overload fusion that turn and not even dare to try some Cyber Network shenanigans. I guess you can run this in Overdragon Turbo, but this whole thing is just a lousy piece of Chimeritic overcorrection to me. Quick shout out to Duality, a quick play spell that lets you tribute a light or dark monster to special summon one from your hand or extra deck with the same type and level but a different attribute. This is a pretty damn versatile card for a lot of decks, but it almost feels tailor-made for Cyber Dragons. Vanilla Sideway into Rampage, Mega Fleet into Cyber End, and especially Fortress Dragon into Cyber Twin are all pretty strong tagouts, made even better by the fact that the card is a quick play. This lets you not only dodge targeting, but also increases your damage output tremendously by letting you swap a monster after it attacks, and then going in for another swing with a new summon. Fusing away the opponent's field into Fortress, attacking, and then replacing it with Cyber Twin Dragon is a potential OTK that really makes the card stand out as a tech choice. It's not necessary, hell, some people don't even like it at all, but it offers enough for the deck to make it a card to consider. Wait! Now don't tell anyone I told you this, but you can use Duality to swap Yosvarog for Cyber Ogre 2. Take that to bed with you tonight. Okay? It's an ogreific play. Cybernetic Overflow is a normal trap that lets you banish Cyber Dragons with different levels from your hand, face-up field, and or graveyard, then destroy an equal number of cards your opponent controls. If this card on the field is destroyed by a card effect, add one Cyber spell or trap from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effect of Cybernetic Overflow once per turn. As a Cyber Dragon banishing trap with a floating effect, Overflow makes itself distinct from Network by not being complete trash. It's multiple non-targeting destruction for an easily achievable cost, which you can also circumvent with Cyberload, along with a search on floating that you can trigger yourself if absolutely necessary. While not imperative to run in a pure build, the popular trap variant that focuses on limiting the opponent's resources and clearing the field for an OTK can afford to run multiple of these. It took a while to get anywhere, but this banish focus playstyle gives the deck some build variety and can be pretty fun in its own way. Again, Overflow works in just about any kind of Sidra deck depending on the ratios, so do with it whatever you want. Don't put it into the sink, it'll overflow. And the final Cyber Dragon card is the trap, Born from Draconis. The card lets you banish all light machine monsters from your graveyard and your face-up field to special summon one level 6 or higher light machine monster from your hand, ignoring its summoning conditions, and if you do, its attack and defense become equal to the number of monsters banished to activate this card times 500, also it is unaffected by card effects except its own and discards. You cannot special summon other monsters the turn you activate this card. If you couldn't tell, as it's been a while since the monster in question, and or you're not up to speed on your celestial formations, this is a card that summons Cyberel Tannin. What Evolution and Burst was to Overdragon, Born from Draconis is to that card, meaning it gives a new way to summon a boss monster while giving it a power-up that's, overall, probably not worth running an unsearchable card for. Now, giving complete effect immunity to a big beater that drops a nuke on summon is actually pretty cool. Just ask Raid Raptors about their exercise in Xyz Access. My god, it's full of stars. If you are running Iltanin, this can make it into a quick play dark hole, in addition to making it pretty damn sturdy. However, the card is still very bricky and relies on you being in kind of a specific specific game state to get the most out of it. It's a neat card for some manga flair, but not much more than that. I can't even commend it for the cool Draco constellation teaming because Drytrons completely ate their lunch here. I do think the artwork is beautiful at least, and did you know these little stars off in the distance actually represent the constellation WoW Warrior?
Wow.
Time for the grades. Consistency is a category this deck is close to passing with flying colors, given all the searching and ways to make use of limited resources. On the other hand, it's known for shitting itself and dying on turn 1, and bricks can still be abundant regardless of who's on first. This is more like a 3.5, but I don't see the spot for that on here, so it's a 4. Power 5! They could use some more removal though. Recovery is present in quite a few cards, either as floating, revival, or reusing materials from the graveyard or banishment. You wouldn't think that given the teaming, but it's a very economical archetype. I appreciate it being one of those rare OTK decks that might give you a comeback chance in case you flop the initial swing, even though there's nothing super crazy going on here. A decent 3 if I've ever seen one. The protection though is not great. Or good really. Save for a few mediocre cards that give your monsters some effect immunity, there's nothing going on here. As far as this archetype is concerned, the best defense is offense. I respect it, but that's a 1. Finally, the versatility. This deck has gone through a good amount of permutations over the years, but has unfortunately kinda dropped off lately due to a lack of new cards. That said, there's a lot to work with here. The Light Machine designation makes it flexible for future support, the existing cards enable a good bit of build variety, and they have several boss monsters that are probably gonna remain objectively good against most decks. This is an archetype that's easy to mold into the way you prefer playing it, so while it could be doing more, the stuff it does right now is not bad at all. Based on the deck's performance throughout the years, it's just a matter of time before a new Cyber Dragon variant pops up in the meta, so I think the overall versatility warrants a 3. Here's a common pure build employing most of their good stuff, and here's an example of the popular Trap variant. Out of all the archetypes that made their way from the anime into the game, Cyber Dragons definitely left one of the most unique marks on it. Regardless of their meta relevancy as a deck, which mind you was still considerable, their most tangible effect was drastically influencing deck building and future design by single cards. Weirdly enough, the rest of the archetype is surprisingly basic, especially for an early GX deck, with only a few outlandish pieces of support in their lifespan. It's been nearly 20 years since Cybernetic Revolution, and Cyber Dragons are still a simple but efficient deck aiming to overpower the opponent as quickly as possible, which, while not perennially entertaining, very much fits Rio's stoic personality. It even provides a good contrast against the highly unorthodox Cyberdark playstyle, which was also reflected in his change of character, because GX is a good show. Mostly. It feels a bit strange that they haven't had an actual wave of pure support in 6 years, especially with their popularity leading to a Rush Duel adaptation and a tournament-friendly tactical tri-deck in the OCG. You don't need a lot to make an OTK deck functional today, even more so one that's already competent to this level, so maybe just give them some more solid ground to stand on, or thicker armor plating I guess, and if you must, sprinkle in a bit of splashable meta breaking for the tradition, because that's what you call the true cyber style technique.
In the dungeons of the Maryland State Correctional Facility, I discovered the remains of a monster that exists nowhere on the record. It must have been so ancient, so powerful, that even Konami refused to acknowledge its existence. And it would have stayed that way, if not for the power of my machines. Arise, my creation! Arise and terrify the world once more! That definitely peaked the mic.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Roboto.
I am Kozaki, the most brilliant mind of Demon World.
Well, domo arigato, Mr. Miyazaki. I loved your work in Cave of the Winds.
Oh, this was a mistake.
Wow, this really makes you consider the meaning of life. Not that I would know.
This was such a mistake.
Hang on, don't say anything. I gotta install some new drivers. Okay, hang on. I'm connecting to your printer. Are you Print Pro 20XX or are you Crunklesoft 99? It's telling me to press any key, but there's too many choices.
Nobody has to know this happened. I can just fix this.
To do the Reign of Terror thing now, I probably missed a lot of mail, so I think I should call the post office. And if I do that, I'm probably gonna have to call someone about my cable bill. And I gotta check that I actually had a house this whole time, because I might have just dreamed that I had a house.
All it takes is one press of a button.
Sorry, hang on. I'm detecting an audio device, but I didn't plug anything in. Do you know what that's about? Hard drive.